In this day and age, with the rise of technology, we seem to be more connected than ever before. However, this perceived connectivity often masks a deeper sense of disconnection. Despite having more access to various means of communication, we have forgotten the most essential aspect: deep connection. It's true that social media and technology have enabled us to communicate more frequently and instantaneously. We can send messages to coworkers, parents, friends, and others in seconds. Yet, without fostering genuine connections, these interactions often feel superficial. In contrast, ancient times might offer a lesson in meaningful engagement. People would gather on the streets, converse with each other, and use their rhetorical skills in public forums, especially in the political arenas of ancient Europe. Today, despite greater accessibility to communication tools, we are the opposite of what we used to be. Walking the same streets, riding the same buses, working in the same places, yet feeling alone and isolated. As humans, we never actually bothered enough to see where loneliness comes from. We never felt it deeply enough, and we always saw it as a feeling, but never as an actual disconnection. Even though a lot of different people and philosophers described it as something that is a part of life or as something suiting for only some people, it's inevitable to admit that in this exact period of history, loneliness is an epidemic. I can even prove this epidemic right now with this example. This is a TikTok that I posted after doing some inner work. I had this urge and inspiration to make a simple video with this one and simple question: how are you? The feedback I received made me realize that this is the question people desperately need to be asked. I didn't have this much engagement before in my small account, and that didn't essentially matter to me as much as the intrinsic motivation to send some kind energy. This engagement confirmed my observations that we all are so disconnected and lonely that we don't even ask ourselves, how are we? We are so used to this deep sense of loneliness that we don't bother enough to look into it. I am going to get personal for a moment to explain why I'm making this exact video. I was born into a wealthy family, thanks to two hardworking parents, but the cost of that financial abundance was immense. My parents' toxic relationship and destructive psychological patterns took a toll on all of us. My dad became a workaholic and a subtle alcoholic. He was rarely home, while my mom, burdened by the stress of an unresolved past, their relationship, work, along with the demands of raising 3 children, inflicted physical, emotional, and mental abuse on all of us. Instead of progressing through childhood like other children, we had to adapt too quickly. Survival was all we knew. I never developed a sense of home. For years, my sister took care of me, and it always felt as if I didn't have parents. We were 3 orphans, constantly abandoned and forced to fend for ourselves. This lack of childhood created a deep disconnection within me, a void I still can't seem to reach the end of. There was always food, but we were always starving. At a very young age, I became alarmingly anorexic due to emotional malnourishment. It was my way of coping with the damage that I endured. The lack of love and safety was physically visible in me and physically visible to everyone, but there was absolutely no one to help. This reality shattered my confidence and my ability to ask and connect with others and feel supported. I lost my footing. Even though currently I have healthy and mature relationships, I still feel this emptiness, this disconnection from everyone. It's not just mental, it's somatic, and these feelings are triggered by many events that are happening to me. And after years of struggling with this abandonment trauma and this unending sense of disconnection rooted in my unsupported childhood, I have decided to confront this cold and painful void within myself. I started doing a lot of inner work. I started doing inner child work, And for a couple of years, I relied on watching videos, writing, journaling, IFS self-therapy, and belief transformations. And things got even better and more intense after I stumbled upon Teal Swan's book called The Anatomy of Loneliness. Because this book changed my life forever, I'm going to use it to change yours. The Anatomy of Loneliness by Teal Swan is a profound exploration of one of humanity's most pervasive yet least understood emotions, loneliness. Through a blend of personal insights, psychological analysis, and spiritual wisdom, Swan delves deeply into the heart of what it means to feel disconnected from others, from ourselves, and from the world around us. In this book, Teal argues that loneliness is not merely a result of being alone, but rather a symptom of deeper emotional wounds, trauma, fear, and a lack of self-connection. She invites readers on a journey of self-discovery and healing, offering practical tools and exercises to help mend the fractures within our own consciousness and, by extension, our connections with others. By unpacking the roots of loneliness and providing a roadmap for reconnection, this book serves as both a mirror and a guide for those who struggle with feelings of isolation. Swan's approach is both empathetic and direct, challenging readers to confront the painful aspects of their inner world while offering hope for a more connected and fulfilled life. "We are conceived in connection," she wrote. "We are suckled in the security and warmth of connection from the very moment that our mothers hold us against their breast. We cannot perceive the difference between our mother and ourselves, so it is then, in that state of oneness, that we are the closest to who and what we really are. So close that we don't even bother to ask the question, 'Who am I?' There is no need to do so because we are not differentiated. In the ecstasy of connection, there is a profound stillness of being. Our movement through life is not motivated by the angst of having to earn anything that we are lacking. Instead, doing is simply a natural expression of being. It's this state of being that is most natural to us, and it's this state of connection that has been corrupted in us. But how did this corruption happen? Where did things go south? And most importantly, why do things go this way? Why can't we stay in this state of oneness forever? Without separation, there is no expansion. In order for expansion to occur, we need both separation and oneness. Separation can also be defined as trauma. Trauma can be the experience of separation of particularly anything. We all experience trauma when we separate from our mother's breast. We all experience trauma the moment when we get out of our mother's womb, because in those moments we perceive that we are not one anymore, we are separated. This loss of connection is one of the roots of this deep loneliness that we feel in our everyday life. The reason why I think that this deep-rooted loneliness is so complex is because it's accompanied by a lot of grief. This early period is basically when our sense of connection usually starts to get corrupted, but this isn't the case for everyone. There are many people who experience this much earlier than that. There are cases where the mother doesn't love the child, or the mother gets abused during pregnancy. We also have thought patterns of the parent during pregnancy which can influence the baby into feeling this kind of separation much earlier. The levels of stress also influence the baby, the mother's attitude towards the baby, how she takes care of it, etc. We are deeply sensitive and vulnerable creatures. That's our nature because we are interdependent. The only reason why this would be on our way is because of our collective and individual unconsciousness. When we let our unconsciousness and determinism rule us, we are more prone to hurting everyone around us, including ourselves, because of our own projections. Let's include some science. Even centuries before scientists discovering these remarkable findings regarding fetal behavior, pregnant women noticed fetal responses to music and other sounds. What they noticed was only the beginning of the complexity of the truth that fetuses are aware since their very formation. A research from 1997 indicates that the fetus can distinguish between familiar and new stimuli by the 32nd and the 33rd week. This proof of fetal learning also comes from studies where newborns remember the stimuli to which they were exposed before birth, such as their mother's heartbeats, the odor of the amniotic fluid, along with the stories and pieces of music they heard in the womb. Because of the universe's current design, it is not usual to stay in this state of oneness forever. Because if we do that, we can be essentially born without experiencing separation. When we are born, we also experience intense separation from Source or God or the energy that creates life. That is life. Source decided to separate it in order to recognize itself. Because if it's only one, it can't hold different perspectives other than one. Separation is the fruit of progress, expansion, and growth. Because of this design, we experience deep loneliness, and this emotion is not bad. It only indicates separation. It tells us the information that we hold, and it tells us that we are separated in our own reality, that part of us has the perception that we are isolated in our reality, and because of that, it thinks that no one can join it, perceive it, or understand it. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. It's our birthright to come back to this blissful feeling of oneness again. In fact, that's our goal in this third dimensional experience. We can be in this state of oneness again. That is not impossible. But of course, we didn't get separated overnight. This means that we can be in this state of oneness overnight. It's also important that this universe is not black and white. We can't experience constant and complete isolation and constant and perfect state of oneness. Usually there are so many gradients and layers of gray. There is no constant white without the other opposite, and vice versa. While Teal was leading her own movement of connection and authenticity, she noticed this incredibly painful epidemic that we talked about at the beginning. At the time when she observed this plague of loneliness among so many people, she didn't have the answer because she felt exactly the same way. She described how she thought that her overwhelming fame would bring her closer to people, but she was wrong. She felt even lonelier because of how people would place their projections onto her. This role of being a mirror is something that devastated her, and this is something that I as well relate to on a very deep and personal level. She introduced this masterpiece with the following. When you're facing a problem without a solution, you are left with one option, and that is to look for the answer yourself. I had found myself in the position of being a pioneer in uncharted territory. I saw all too clearly that loneliness was the #1 source of suffering on our planet, and also what we are all trying to avoid through a multitude of different coping strategies. But you cannot avoid something and learn about it at the same time, so I made the decision to do the opposite. The spiritual teachers of the old world were known to go into the desert or into a cave in an attempt to understand something about the universe. I decided to take the same approach, only instead of disappearing into a cave, I disappeared into loneliness by shamanic journeying in Central America, where I decided I would look the devil in the face. It turned out to be a little more than a year-long process. Seeing loneliness for what it was and its anatomy allowed me to understand its opposite. By seeing loneliness clearly, I saw connection clearly, and so I emerged into the world again, ready to teach people about their loneliness and about connection. And it was with this newfound understanding in my heart, mind and body that I wrote this book. The anatomy of loneliness evolved from the disorganized collection of notes I took, often on tear-stained papers that were stuffed into my backpack for every shamanic journey that I embarked on during that time period of my life. The book practically wrote itself through me. Using this information, I was able to turn loneliness into connection in my own life and in the lives of every other member of my community. Unconsciousness can be like a virus that spreads from one generation to the next, but so can awakening. It is my vision that the information in this book will spread across the planet until we can officially say that we live in a world with billions of people and none of us feels alone. The trauma of disconnection caused us to lead an endless tug of war between the aspects of ourselves who are so desperate to get that connection back by any means, and the aspects who are willing to destroy and push connection in any way possible. The trauma of disconnection is the worst that happens to all of us. Teal explains trauma as something that fragments us and splits us apart. These experiences cause us to put on gray-colored glasses, which most of us wear for the rest of our lives. This is how we only see the world through pain and through the perception that we are alone. Quote, "It's enough that disconnection causes us pain, but the truth is, it doesn't stop there. This pain bleeds out across the planet. If you're truly connected to something, you cannot cause it pain without causing yourself pain too. When we perceive ourselves to be disconnected, we no longer feel the ripple of oneness that is our fundamental truth. We no longer feel the impact that everything has on us and that we have on everything else, and as a result, we can cause something or someone else pain without perceiving it in ourselves." Unquote. This connection was the reason why many populations were segregated. The book contains examples of history that we all know, but we never actually realized that this loneliness is the root of all. People with dark skin being taken from families and used as slaves, who were raped, burnt alive, killed, the extermination camps that were created to exterminate Jews, and people who opposed the Nazi regime, the drop of the atomic bomb onto Hiroshima, etc. Every crime happened because of this connection and this perception that we are separate, that we don't hurt ourselves when we hurt someone else, which is something that the justice systems in almost every country doesn't even bother to look into. This is what makes us dangerous, nothing else. Humans are not dangerous. This root, this disconnection is the culprit. But this feeling of loneliness isn't so easy to solve by having people around. Teal learned that this feeling is the same as starving in a grocery store. She observed, "Connection implies a kind of harmony. It would be easy to assume that this loneliness would therefore be completely absent of harmony. And yet, there is an element of harmony in loneliness. That harmony is the number 3, which represents harmony. Specifically, I'm referring to the kind of harmony that includes and synthesizes two opposites." Swan found the key to loneliness by explaining that it's never a good idea to get rid of the oppositional part, which in this case is number 2, or destroying or suppressing the causation of the loneliness. This third part of loneliness's anatomy is actually the part that merges the chaos of these two parts, which become harmonious. This is why she wrote that this unity is symbolized by the number 3, is the number of integration, and it combines these two opposites. She gives this example. Imagine for a moment that entity number 1 represents good and entity number 2 represents evil. These are two opposites. Entity 3 would demonstrate what is needed is a bringing together of both good and evil toward a common goal that is greater than both of them. That goal can be called oneness, the ultimate form of connection. The key to solving loneliness lies into integrating and healing these 3 so-called pillars, which are separation, shame, and fear. The first pillar, separation, takes us much earlier than any human. This is the pillar that I explained at the beginning of the video. In order to understand this, imagine God or Source as this energy, this oneness that is the same energy contained in every cell, every plant, every creation, every animal. The tricky part is, as Teal implies, is that the human brain is designed only for the physical world. It's not designed to comprehend oneness because when it thinks of one, it thinks of a thing. And in order for the brain to think of a thing, it needs to perceive that thing as separate, even if it thinks of things like air, water, or empty space. She describes this consciousness of God as an infinite ocean which has no beginning and no end. All of us are droplets, including our best friends, worst enemies, the coffee table, your dog, etc. All of these droplets are nothing more than different expressions of the same energy. These are the droplets that make up the ocean, which means that there is no droplet that is no source or God. This is how the writer explains oneness. She explains this concept this way as well. Quote, "Imagine a TV screen with static on it. Imagine that the static is just potential energy. You could call it potential energy because static is only the potential of an image. An image that has not yet appeared, but once it begins to appear, it is differentiated from the rest of the static. We then see the image as different to the background static and any other images that may appear on the screen. A thought within Source God consciousness is like this. It is like a part of the static that condenses into a singular shape and form and differentiates it from the static. As it applies to things in the world, a physical thing like you or a coffee table or a tree is in fact just a thought that was thought, differentiated by Source or God. It is a thought that has been fed with enough focus that is now so differentiated and enters the dimension of physicality, the dimension of the most density. Going back to the analogy, physicality is the most separate from static that anything made of static becomes. And seeing as how you are simply a differentiated aspect of Source or God consciousness, you are imbued with that source or God consciousness. This means you are a thought that can think new thoughts. When viewed from this angle, you can see that source or God does not create more of itself because it is already everything. Instead, it divides itself. Each new thought is like a new division within the wholeness of source consciousness." Unquote. The thought, "Who am I?" completely changed this consciousness. Suddenly, source or God experiences this birth of self-awareness. Because this thought is a direct contradiction to oneness, it cracked this oneness. This is where God felt the unbearable torture of the fact that there is nothing for it to be in a relationship with. As Teal says, the second it created a fracture within itself, it perceived itself as isolated. This feeling is inherently present in all of us, and it's so painful that it can't be described with words. Just like how a cell would uncontrollably divide itself, these thoughts caused so much fractures that fractures formed in those fractures as well. Soon enough, these fractures forgot what they were a part of because of this new held thought of separation. As Teal puts it, quote, "This illusion of separateness was a kind of tipping point, after which all further fractures within that oneness no longer perceived that oneness. They only perceived self and other. This was the birth of the ego, which is a sense of separate self, and this was the birth of relationship. It was also the birth of attachment. Different aspects of source become like enemies. They couldn't see themselves as one. They saw themselves as disconnected from one another, and so they began to devour each other and run from each other. They began to push and pull." We often misinterpret this feeling of loneliness. We often think that it's because of the absence of other, but that's not exactly the case. The absence is the wholeness within ourselves. It's the absence of the perception that all of us are essentially parts of each other as well as parts of source or God. Either way, we need to understand and hold this perspective. It's essential in our path of awakening and reintegrating. The first pillar is basically the pillar of fragmentation. It's also very important to notice that the external world is fragmented based on our internal one. This is something that most families don't teach us because of our slumbering society. This is a big causation of loneliness because of the early conditioning that some things, topics, or aspects are acceptable and valid, and others are not. This varies from an individual to an individual because every family has different values and norms. This is a period where any aspect of ourselves is rejected because of projection, no matter if it's positive or negative. And we only show the aspects of us that are acceptable because those things are included. This means that we are loved only when we show these acceptable parts. In order for every child to survive, it suppresses and disowns everything that is not acceptable and exaggerates everything that is valued and supported. This creates an internal split within all of us. This dissociation from the unacceptable creates the split that we all know as conscious and unconscious. And Teal sees this as the formation of what we call the personality. You can already understand that this self-preservation tactic is the first act of self-rejection or fragmentation. Can you see that we relive the same thing as source or God? We crack and fragment the moment when we start caring about who we actually are. Just like how the writer defines it. It's a mirror of the process that took place originally within source consciousness when it thought to define itself and ended up creating disunity rather than oneness. Because of this fragmentation, all of us have personalities with such contradictory traits. And this is because we all are made of multiple personalities. BPD is only the diagnosis, but all of us have it in different levels and intensities. Our most dominant and controlling personalities always are in charge of making sure for us not to get hurt, especially in the environment we grew up in. These personalities are often described like inner twins, and the intensity of your fragmentation depends on the degree of the trauma that you experienced. If you want to know more about this, you can watch my videos Why Are We Afraid of Happiness and my review on Black Swan, which is the perfect representation of this process. If you are experiencing more chronic or severe loneliness, that means that you are on the more severe end of the scale. We can have many pairs of inner inner twins actually, and they all have a purpose. Understanding these dynamics will completely change your life. Teal here gives a perfect example about anger. Imagine that a child is born into a family where anger is not an okay emotion to express. When the child gets angry, they are shamed, so the child learns to suppress and deny it for the sake of survival within the household. But the anger doesn't go away. The child just consciously denies it. It becomes subconscious. As an adult, this person is unlikely to have any awareness that they have anger in them at all. They will not and cannot see themselves clearly because they have denied that aspect of themselves. So, if another person tells this individual, "You are really an angry person," the individual won't relate to that at all. They'll probably only relate to themselves as easygoing. But when we deny, suppress, or disown something, it doesn't disappear. It just fades from our conscious awareness. If we are asked to acknowledge it, it will bring up the same fear of the initial rejection and can make us feel like we are going to die. This is why self-awareness isn't so easy to attain. So, why am I describing all of this? Because when we disown all of these parts of ourselves, we end up experiencing all of those deep and unbearable emotions of loneliness. I mean, hello, these rejected parts are missing. We can't accomplish this original state of oneness and completion because the goal of our souls is to become one again. We are given every opportunity to achieve this throughout our lives. The reason why we don't do this is because we reject the same parts that we disowned a really long time ago. So you know that we all have a larger subconscious and a smaller conscious mind. The tricky part is that there are multiple fragments here. This means that every part of us which is exaggerated in the conscious has a direct polar opposite in the subconscious. Swan gives a very insightful thought on this. Men and women, both of you look at this. Quote, "For example, in my childhood, if my vulnerability was seen as an unacceptable weakness, and I faced rejection or some other painful punishment because of it, I would fragment myself so that this vulnerable aspect of me was buried deep away from my own awareness. Instead, I would identify outwardly with being tough and strong. That would be the personality that I showed to the world. Still, the original vulnerable part of me didn't go away. It just got buried, and because it is buried, I cannot meet the needs of this vulnerable self. As a result, its energy often gets expressed in covert and manipulative ways. In essence, a fight ensues between the two personalities over which one gets to take over my body. I may even get sick from this internal fight, which might physically force me into a state of vulnerability to the dismay of my external tough, strong self. Please note that not only are these two personality traits on completely different pages, but they also inhibit quite different parallel perceptual realities. It's very important to know that these sub-personalities don't show up as separate personalities, but as states of being that take over when they are triggered over a certain circumstance or event. For example, one of these personalities could simply be experienced as suddenly wanting to end a relationship and escape off by yourself, when just earlier the same day you were loving the other person's embrace and planning your future together. You also need to know that these denied and disowned parts will be completely invisible to you while they are completely obvious to others. With this, one shares this truth, quote, "The more we hate something in someone else, the more we rejected it within ourselves a long ago. And the opposite is true. The more we love something in someone else, the more we sorrowfully disowned it in ourselves. Thus, all of these extreme negative and extreme positive reactions to other people are actually perfect opportunities to develop self-awareness." Unquote. Let's cut to the chase. How do we actually reverse this process of fragmentation? Reversing this process is the key to healing loneliness, even though it can be really difficult because we need to make space for all of the disowned parts to be welcomed into the light of our consciousness. Here are the following steps that Teal wrote in the book in order to enhance this process. 1. Look at the negative traits that you hate in others, especially in your partner. What bothers you in others? 2. Discover the positive intention behind the thing you hate. What is that trait trying to keep you safe from? What is its positive intention for being present in your life? The answer, of course, is always going to be in line with trying to keep you from getting hurt. 3. Ask yourself, why was it dangerous to be the opposite of that negative trait? For example, if you are lazy, Ask yourself, why was it so dangerous or not okay to be not driven and motivated while you were growing up? 4. Recognize that no matter how much you want to deny it, the traits you hate in other people are a direct mirror of what you have rejected in yourself. The more you try to protect yourself from yourself, the more the aspects you hate in others will look nothing like you. Don't be surprised if you tell yourself, I'm not that way at all. It's natural. 5. Be willing to choose to be vulnerable and open your mind to gain full awareness of how you're similar to the traits you dislike so much in other people, especially your partner, children, and parents. There are 2 possibilities here. Either you are very much like those things you hate in others, or it's so buried and rejected in you that you never do that same thing, even to the degree that you have an unhealthy aversion for it. 6. If you're struggling with this, involve other people in the process. This is a humbling step to take. A good way to tell if you have suppressed something is if it has been reported to you by more than one person. So think back on common complaints people have had about you. Another way is to have the people that are the closest to you write down your negative traits and take special notice of the things that more than one person mentioned. Pay especially close attention to the things people say about you that bother you. 7. Turn the tables now and ask yourself about the negative trait itself, rather than the positive one you focused on in step 3. In other words, why was it so dangerous or not okay to exhibit those negative traits in your life? For example, why was it so not okay to be lazy? 8. Begin to find approval for the traits that you dislike in others and in yourself, but do this without lying to yourself. You can't say you like something you don't like, but there may be things about that negative trait that are positive that you do like. For example, a person who is cruel may have no problem caring what other people think of them. 9. Adopt the aspects of others that you hate that are suppressed aspects of yourself in a way that benefits you. This doesn't mean become lazy or become cruel. What it means is take time off or quit saying yes to everyone. Think about it. What is the positive aspect of someone who is lazy? They are not afraid to rest or to take time off for themselves. So adopting that disowned aspect of yourself could take the form of you taking a rest. This will bring you closer to a state of wholeness and integration with your inner twins and keep them from battling so much within you. Personally, this part of the book saved my life because it made me finally notice the parts I was disowning my whole life. It helped me realize that I actually saw these disowning parts in my partner. He was a perfect mirror that taught me how to recognize these polar opposites that are deeply suppressed in my subconscious mind and bring them back to myself again. When I didn't do this, I felt such deep loneliness, even though the relationship felt mature and healthy. What I realized is the reason why I felt so dissociated and separate from him. The reason was because I felt separated from the parts of me that I disowned. They were missing, so I never felt whole. One of the positive intentions in the part that wanted me to leave the relationship was to protect myself, especially from experiencing his sadness and his problems as if they were mine, or carrying my burden in the relationship that could potentially harm me. What it turned out to be is that I disowned the same parts in him that my parents disowned in me. And the more I noticed this, the more I realized that because of my partner's picture of being a worthless partner in my parents' eyes, actually made them see me as a worthy and important person for the first time in my life. I had many wounds to heal at that period of my life, and the moment I realized this, after such a long time, a beautiful and a familiar feeling appeared. It felt rather peaceful and relieving, even though it opened up even more questions and hidden emotions. This was the experience of wholeness that I send to all of you. See you in part 2. Can't wait for you to return and continue this journey with me. So please like and share and subscribe to see more. Did you like the visit in the Wunderkammer? If you did, please like, subscribe, and share this content if you see it as helpful. Did you also notice the artworks in this video? They're not put accidentally. If you want to understand my philosophical reasons of why I put them in the video, you can become a crow on Patreon. In that tier, I'm posting the paintings and the contacts they have in the video. You can also see them like Easter eggs. But only crows can see through the messages, because they are messengers themselves. You can also become a raven. In that tier, you can ask me for answers and guidance about anything you're curious about, and you're going to receive a high quality answer. I also have playlists on Spotify under my name, Katerina Lunas, if you need something to trigger and enhance your emotional experience. Can you hear the footsteps? They're the footsteps of illusion. It's coming. But what are you going to do about it? Accept it or do something about it?